And just real quick for an update for those who don't recall, or perhaps it's your first time viewing one of these, this is not a tutorial in any way, shape, or form. I do offer these in segmented videos as tutorials on the Patreon. If you're interested, it's at the $5 level. We post almost every day, and it's the top link right there in the description. That being said, this is more of an overview and sort of a talk about the process and more of a afterthoughts or lessons learned in regards to it. And this one actually ended up becoming a pretty quintessential piece for me because it taught me a lot of things regarding how to approach Transformer dioramas. And now I pretty much have it down to a science for my needs. And it's a funny lesson that was learned. But before we get there, I'm going to talk a bit about this. And this is that the beautiful thing about not only this diorama, but most of the Transformers dioramas that I'm doing nowadays is that I can make it using scraps, which is always nice when you have just extra pieces laying around. You feel bad just throwing them in the trash, and then you end up having a pile, and then before you know it, you end up spending a lot of resources in storing piles of scraps, and it's nice to have a collection that lends itself towards scrap pieces, which is something that I have learned recently. Anyway, that's the beauty here. Now, let me talk about this lesson that I learned. Forget my voice also. I'm getting a cold, I think. I don't know, going into the colder months, and it sucks for dioramas too, because a lot of times I'll sit stuff out in the sun to dry, but we won't be doing that as we head into these colder months. But this lesson learned. So one of the things I struggle with, not just in dioramas, but in anything kind of creatively that I do, is that I always feel like I'm holding myself to a standard of making sure I'm not cutting any corners or being lazy, right? So it happens with dummies. It happens with sit down Saturdays. It happens with drawings that I do where I'm like, I might as well go ahead and add this extra thing, because if I don't, I'm cutting a corner and I'm being lazy, and we don't tolerate laziness here, is kind of how I feel. So it's the same thing with dioramas. In the past, I have gone to great lengths to sort of add extra stuff and bells and whistles and as many different layers and sort of complex combinations of layouts in order to pull off a desired look, but also to like really swing for the fences in regards to the diorama, because I don't want to look at it afterwards and be like, you cut a corner here, you were being lazy. So some of it comes down to painting too, right? So as we move into this painting section, most of the times I'll base coat, wash, dry brush, airbrush, usually in that order. But the reason why I do that is because I'm like, I need to throw everything I have at this so that I'm not cutting any corners. However, what I have learned is that sometimes not everything needs the dry brush. Sometimes not everything needs the wash. Sometimes it just needs the airbrush, or sometimes it just needs a dry brush, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes less is more. And that's a hard thing for me to deal with personally, is the less is more philosophy. So it's something that really was taught to me in this diorama. Less is more. So I didn't set out with this to make the most impressive looking diorama that had ever been created. I set out with this to make the most functional and efficient diorama created for these characters. We're talking about Constructicon. So we're talking about 6 bulky, blocky, space occupying characters. You know, they're not small. So they need room. And I could have easily done something super complicated with scaffolding and everything, which was my initial thought, in order to pull off the kind of construction, gimmick and also display the figures, but really donate and spend a lot of time in regard to building the diorama. But instead, I was like, look, I'm going to take something from G1 as an inspiration. So in this one, the inspiration is Heavy Metal War, where they're in that kind of, I know it's not a gravel pit, but I've been calling it a gravel pit little cavern to fight between Prime and Megatron. And it's the episode that introduces the Constructicons. So that's the inspiration for the setting. So from there, it's just like, okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about a gloomy day, right? Because it was a kind of it was on the verge of a storm in the episode, and we're talking about a gravel pit, for lack of a better term. Not the one from Wu-Tang, but the one from Heavy Metal War. So it was easy. It was and after that was kind of decided upon, it's just square base. Then you start cutting out pieces that you need to elevate or maneuver or place the figures in a place where they can be seen amongst the other figures. So the other thing that I kind of took away from this is, I think Lookout Mountain might have been the first, but this was definitely in that running of, I am going to place each piece of the diorama in its rough location and then place the figures in it so that I know at the end of the day, these figures are going to get their just due in regards to space and in regards to visibility. Because while I do take pride in the dioramas and I do take pride in the craftsmanship of them, I also spent hundreds of dollars on these toys, and I want to make sure that those hundreds of dollars can be seen and appreciated, which is kind of the basis for all of this in a way. So, those were the kind of lessons learned. It's how I approached this. And from here on out, I end up making a lot of Transformer dioramas that I think most of you have seen now in the last Dummies episode. I showed a lot of them, not all of them, because I've made more than what you saw, but a lot of them. And I'm able to make them a lot faster, and I'm able to make them a lot more efficiently. And while I may not be as proud of them as I am of maybe some of the Star Wars ones I've done or some of the Marvel Legends ones I've done, they are as equally efficient as those other ones in terms of kind of accomplishing the goal, which is to create a realistic environment and then place the figures in it. Every time I do one of these, I'm often plagued in the comments with, have you ever thought about doing an Ark or a Nemesis? And just to rehash it, I know I sound like a broken record for those that have kind of kept up, but I've tried it. I did not care for it. I don't like it. I don't want these characters to look like they're in a cartoon any more than they already do with some of the recent Takara offerings. I want them to look like they're in realistic environments, and I want them to be, for the most part, on Earth environments. I have broken that rule with the next video that we're going to do on Bob the Builder, and then I have one other one that I'm going to do that's off-world also. But for the most part, just believable environments. Oh, real quick, this part right here. So this was a lesson learned. The wash hadn't dried underneath the layers of styrofoam, and I didn't see it. I just noticed it right there. So that when I went to tilt it, the wash dripped from underneath the layers of styrofoam out towards my hands. And then I had to go back, I had to blot it, and then kind of start over in that regard. So, another little quick lesson learned. But yeah, it's this has set definitely the bass drum for everything that I'm doing now in regards to Transformers, and I'm knocking them out. I'm hoping to do once I get them all finished. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to have the dioramas finished before I have my collection finished. I've already come to terms with that. But after that, I hope to do a video like really showcasing, my layouts, because they are turning out nice. And it took a few stumbles in the road to kind of figure out exactly what I wanted to do. I'll also talk about this real quick, that scaffolding piece that you saw me work on. Well, it's like an I-beam, for lack of a better term. I've also learned that it's important to me in these dioramas to have something that breaks up the forward and back planes. It's not always possible, but while those I-beams can get in the way visually of the diorama, they do they prevent the diorama from just being clumps of stuff in the back of the shelf. There's now stuff in the foreground, and just visually it helps break it up a good bit and helps kind of, I don't know, make it a more believable world to kind of live in. And And yeah, and we're gonna transition here into kind of like my real thoughts at the time of finishing it, so you guys can know kind of exactly what I was thinking about as I completed it and how I felt about it, which is, I think, positive for the most part. A little disappointed in the piece, positive in the shelf overall. Here we go. There it is, done. You know, and it's not much to it. It's not very impressive to look at without figures on it. Unlike some of the other stuff that we've been doing recently, it like looks good before you put figures on it, but I think that's kind of the curse of Transformers. So let me get them on there. And there it is. And I'm pretty happy with it. Like, I think it displays the figures well. It's not the greatest diorama in the world, but I think it does a good job of displaying 6 really large figures on one shelf. And I think it's a good layout. And I think the Constructicons are hard to lay out. So while I don't think it's like, you know, our best anything, I think it might be one of our most effective and raises the caliber of the look of the figures and the shelf itself. So that does it. Another one in the books, and we got 4 here done now. So on to the next.